The battle for time. Dacheldor had not taken Vala with him to the kingdom of the Ettins because of the great risk she posed to him every time she was in danger. Now that the limit bracers were removed from him, Dacheldor suffered no further penalty. He gladly invited his apprentice to accompany him and Prime on their new endeavor. She, like the others, could not see the black tentacles that emerged from Dacheldor's back. To Dacheldor, however, they were a constant reminder of his transformation. They looked remarkably similar to the tentacles he had once had when he was called the Lord of the Shadows. But these tentacles did not rip the souls out of others. These were a manifestation of his own self and his own will. Kara and Den also agreed to go with Dacheldor, though Nicole and Derek stayed behind. They would assist with protecting Castle Darkfire when the machine at its core inevitably shut down. This would allow Bylon and Darkfire to join the group in the hunt for Yunnan Ying. Bylon and Prime reached out with their temporal senses as they traveled, attempting to locate Yunnan Ying. Once their presence was well enough known, they were surprised to find she was heading toward them. She had gathered all of her guardians into a massive army that was coming their way. This gave Prime an idea. He reached out to Nicole and Derek back at the castle and instructed them to turn off the machine at its core. The team questioned this, but Nicole and Derek did as they were instructed. Beams of light shot down from above, surrounding Dacheldor and the others and forming into beings as they landed. Every member of the Keepers of the Cosmos now stood around them, a massive army ready to strike. Prime, who had become invisible, whispered to Dacheldor to stall them. He was crafting a field around them that made it impossible to detect the newcomers from afar, and was hoping to lead Yunnan Ying and the Keepers right into one another. Dacheldor gladly took on the challenge. The Keepers announced Darkfire and the others were to be executed for their crimes, but Dacheldor interrupted their speech. He explained that the Keepers were punishing the wrong enemy. He said the real cause of all that had happened was an Illithal named uzzel'kri and his Akujin servant, Yunnan Ying. He said uzzel'kri had manipulated the Time Lord Bylon and his brother Darkfire, as well as all of their lives in order to bring about his own plans. The Keepers called forth a member of their team who could detect lies. To their surprise, everything Dacheldor was saying was true. Dacheldor further elaborated that he and the others had broken free of this control, and were now trying to defeat uzzel'kri and Yunnan Ying. This too was true. There was suspicion amongst the Keepers about Dacheldor hiding the whole truth, and after some further questions, one thought to ask what had happened to the original team that was sent down. Dacheldor simply answered that they were killed by the real threat. He then attempted to change the subject by bringing up something he knew would interest them. He informed them of the army on its way, and that their presence was being masked from that approaching army. The Lord of the Keepers took the lead at this point, asking how that was possible. He explained that he had seen such power before, but only an Illithal was possible of blocking such a large presence from an Akujin. Prime whispered something into Dacheldor's ear, a way that he could allow others to see the tentacles on his back by concentrating on allowing them to be seen. Dacheldor smiled. "It is possible," he said, "because I am an Illithal." The black tentacles, filled with what appeared to be space and starlight, appeared on Dacheldor's back. The Keepers erupted into noise and confusion. Darkfire and the others gasped. Though they knew what Dacheldor had become, something about seeing the tentacles gave off the feeling of being in the presence of the divine. Dacheldor further elaborated. He explained that he had been trained by a rogue Illithal who had turned on his brethren. He knew full well that the Keepers knew this story, though they did not know any specifics, such as Prime's name. They had heard it during their battles with other Akujin who had supposedly hunted him, but never found anyone who could substantiate it. Dacheldor explained that he was an ancient, born of this cosmos, who had evolved into an Illithal through his training with this Illithal. Once again, this proved to be true. The Keepers were unsure what to make of it. Was the rogue Illithal a threat or a potential ally? What about this new Illithal? The Lord of the Keepers shook his head. He informed Dacheldor that by admitting he was an Illithal to them, he had signed his own death warrant and that of his friends. Rogue or not, the Illithal he had trained under was an enemy of the Keepers. Prime materialized for all to see, only now his tentacles could be seen as well. They were massive, covering most of the battlefield, spreading in all directions around his body.
"It's a pity to learn we cannot be allies,"
his multi-layered voice echoed.
"but I'm afraid it is you who has signed your death warrant."
Yellow light filled the sky. Prime had sent back word to Nicole and Derek to turn the machine back on. Now the Keepers could not leave this cosmos. As the light appeared, Prime dropped the field that was shielding them from sight, as well as another field he had erected to shield Yunnan Ying and her forces from sight. They had completely surrounded all of them. Yunnan Ying laughed as she saw the Keepers were trapped alongside the others. Prime laughed.
There is one thing that I know uzzel'kri and I would both agree on. We can put our rivalry on hold if it means destroying the last of you Keepers.
Yunnan Ying and her forces charged in, holding the Keepers at bay. Dacheldor and Prime leapt into combat with the Lord of the Keepers and his strongest wardens. Darkfire lifted an arm and whole legions of Keepers were swallowed into nothingness. Bylon slowed time around him, striking dozens of keepers at once with his strikes. Kara, Den, and Vala worked together to defend Darkfire from being surrounded. The keepers were no match for the forces of 2 Illithal, 2 Time Lords, a Volant, and an army of Guardians. One by one they fell, until the last lay dying on the ground. Dacheldor stood over him and informed him that the keepers were no longer needed. He would protect this cosmos from the Illithal going forward. Then he ended the keeper's life with a quick thrust of the demon edge. The machine in Castle Darkfire turned off for good. No new keepers arrived. There were no more keepers to arrive. The entire order had been wiped out. Their souls were returned to the source. Yunnan Ying stood in the center of the group with only a handful of guardians left. She applauded them at effectively wiping out her army and the keepers all at once. Then she made an offer. With the keepers gone, uzzel'kri no longer needed to hide. They could all join forces. Perhaps uzzel'kri would even see things Prime's way. Prime shook his head. While he was overjoyed to see the keepers eliminated, uzzel'kri had to die for his plan to succeed. There would be no truce. Yunnan Ying sighed and said, "Have it your way." She lifted her arms and her last remaining guardians fused into a single giant guardian that stood higher than the eye could see. She crawled onto its back, controlling it, and attacked the others. Darkfire tried to pull it into oblivion, but Yunnan Ying was able to undo each of his attempts with her own temporal powers. Bylon slowed the behemoth's moves, but it took all of his strength. Together, they kept Yunnan Ying occupied enough so the others could deal solely with the Guardian. Dacheldor and Prime ran up the Guardian, knocking off parts only to have them grow back. They were pummeled by stone and flung large distances, only to fly back into the fray. Everything seemed at a standstill. Suddenly, the Guardian lurched sideways. On its back, Yunnan Ying was crying out in pain. Long knives in her spine had paralyzed her, causing her to lose her hold on the giant. Den laughed as he pushed the knives deeper. Vala leapt up as she fell, spinning and cutting Yunnan Ying. Kara used her power over blood to draw her directly toward them. In the end, neither Illithal nor Volant had caused the downfall of the behemoth. It had been their allies who had pulled Yunnan Ying from her perch. And with her down, Darkfire, Bylon, Dacheldor, and Prime destroyed the last of the Guardians. Yunnan Ying forced the knives out of her with a dark energy that also pushed the others away. She opened a vortex, entered it, and tried to close it behind her. Bylon used his powers over time to keep it open and urged the others to hurry. Everyone entered, including Bylon, and the vortex closed behind them. They found themselves in another temporal cavern, like Bylon's, and in its center was a pool of water in which uzzel'kri could be seen in his prison realm. Yunnan Ying moved to the waters, touching them and letting them heal her. Prime strode to the waters as well and said,
"It's time."
As Prime touched the waters, they appeared to shatter like glass. Massive black tentacles poured out. A ghastly body of eyes and mouths followed. Prime had released uzzel'kri from his prison. Prime also took on his true Illithal form, and the two became locked in an indescribable combat. While they battled, Yunnan Ying battled the rest of the team on the ground. She fought well, but was ultimately no match for the combined forces of Dacheldor, Darkfire, and Bylon. When she fell, Yunnan Ying's body released a shimmering golden orb. The others all knew what it was when they saw it. It was the full power of the Time Lord. Anyone who touched it and took it into them would become the new master of time for this cosmos. As they looked at it, Prime defeated uzzel'kri and absorbed him into himself. He returned to his typical wraith-like form and walked over to the others with labored steps. He explained that fully consuming uzzel'kri would take some time, possibly longer than even the length of time Dacheldor had lived thus far, but the efforts would be worth it. He would disappear for a while to consume his brother safely, without losing control of his own mind. In the meanwhile, he did not care who chose to become the new master of time. He would not, and would never, control that person. Prime faded from sight, leaving everyone to wonder if he was truly gone. They felt the influence of uzzel'kri completely vanish, and all that remained was the glowing orb. Dacheldor walked over to it. The past Time Lord had controlled him more than anyone. Still, he turned to Bylon and asked, "With uzzel'kri gone, would you use this power as justly as you possibly could?" Bylon promised he would. Dacheldor motioned to him to take the orb. As Bylon took it, Dacheldor whispered, "I forgive you." Bylon was filled with the full power of the Time Lord and more. He was not transformed into an Illithal, but he was definitely more than any mortal could fathom. He thanked the others for saving him from uzzel'kri's grasp and helping him to achieve his dreams. Darkfire hugged his brother and warned never to interfere with his plans again. Bylon returned the others to Castle Darkfire, but remained behind himself. He would have to uncover all of the temporal hotspots if he was going to get the most out of his new role. With no keepers to watch him and no Illithal controlling time, he truly was the one calling the shots now. A new way of life. Darkfire and the others took on the task of repairing Castle Darkfire and the damage that had been done to the Empire. They knew that with uzzel'kri Prime and the Keepers out of the picture, there was no one monitoring and controlling their actions. The future was theirs to create. Everything from this point forward would change. Dacheldor accepted that he would always be an aberration. Though he still felt a deep love for Doomsday, he knew he could be flung backward in time at any moment, and could not wait for her again and again. Even if he did see her again, he was an Illithel now, and she did not share the memories of their past. There was no telling if they would even end up together the next time around. He decided, from that day forward, to accept whatever timeline he was in at the moment. He was an Illithel at the start of its life. He would eventually learn to view time in a completely different way from the others of the cosmos. He could not hold himself accountable for promises to people he had yet to meet. From now on, he would accept the wonders presented right in front of him. He would enjoy the moment and let go of worries of the future. He would follow his intuition toward the things that he felt would make him most fulfilled. When he saw Kara next, he kissed her passionately. They may not be able to be together forever. Time may eventually take her from him, but for now, he would be happy with her, and she wanted to be happy with him. Den informed Dacheldor that Darkfire wanted to see him. Unsure of the urgency, he hurried to Darkfire's private chambers. There he saw 4 familiar faces who he never expected to see. 4 of the 6 founders of the Realm Lord School were in Darkfire's private chambers. They were questioning Darkfire about the disappearance of Genus, and Darkfire was telling them a half-truth. He informed them that he had been a secret apprentice under Genus, who knew absolutely everything Genus had known. This was true if taking into account the previous timelines and the fact that Darkfire now owned Genus's soul. The founders explained that one of their members had mysteriously vanished years ago. The founder of smithing seemed to wink out of existence. The date they gave was the same date as Dacheldor's transformation into an aberration. Dacheldor knew what had happened. Since he had devoured that founder's soul in the previous timeline, that founder had ceased to exist when time reversed. This meant the 6 headmasters needed to run the school were down to 4. 2 would have to be replaced, and prior to this moment, only founders had filled the spaces. The founders further explained that they had halted replacing their missing member to look for him, but thought Genus may be to blame. They suspected him of some very nefarious practices, and had even placed bindings on him. They asked Darkfire and Dacheldor what they knew about this. Dacheldor did not feel like lying, so he simply told the founders he and Darkfire were the ones responsible for the disappearance of both Realm Lords. He further explained that their hunch about Genus was correct, and that was why he and Darkfire had to work together to destroy him. The founders then questioned Dacheldor about his origin, and he nonchalantly explained what an aberration was. He told them he had killed the other founder under Genus's orders in a past timeline, and because he had absorbed his soul, he had learned everything he knew. The founders were wary of Darkfire and Dacheldor, but saw an opportunity with them. Each had the capability to fill in for the missing founders in every conceivable way. There was a great temptation to hire them as headmasters to bring the school back into full operation. Darkfire decided to reveal that he was of Alant to sweeten the deal. He explained in full detail what Genus was trying to do and how Genus had been unable and unwilling to see the less invasive method Darkfire had discovered. He could teach the others if they wanted. The founders decided to take them both on as headmasters, but to restrict their ability to have any say in how things were run until they were sure they could trust them. This would not last long, as Dacheldor and Darkfire would soon come up with the idea for creating the center. They eagerly agreed, knowing together they could take all the control they needed. Dacheldor laughed to himself after the deal was made. During his previous times as a Realm Lord, he had avoided becoming a teacher. Now he was going to be a headmaster. It all seemed funny, yet, at the same time, it also felt right. Darkfire created a duplicate of himself to run Limbo in his absence, happy to go back into the role he had taken after Genus in the previous timeline. He was also glad to have Dacheldor as a fellow headmaster this time. With their combined knowledge of the past timelines, the events these Realm Lords would experience would be massively different from any that had happened before. He brokered a deal for Kara to come with them as well. Though she would not become an instructor, she would become a Realm Lord and remain by Dacheldor's side. The other generals of Limbo would be brought to the school one at a time, trained, and returned to Limbo. Even Den, Vala, Nicole, and Derek would come to learn to become Realm Lords. Everything Darkfire and Dacheldor had worked toward in their lives had finally come together. Their desires for Limbo were met. Their place among the Realm Lords was about to be re-established, and, most importantly, they were truly free. From that day onward, they were never enemies again.